Namaste. I'm Arundhati Nag. I'm speaking from Ranga Shankara. We are trying to repurpose our public spaces at Ranga Shankara, and the first effort we are making in this direction is a bunch of talks with psychiatrist and a theatre friend and an artist also. His name is Dr. Shekhar Seshadri, lest I get it wrong. He is Senior Professor, Department of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry in NIMHANS, and he's also the Associate Dean of Behavioral Sciences. Now, you might wonder why we want to speak to a doctor of such eminence and belonging to the stream of psychiatry. Because I've been serving theatre for the last 45 years, and I do believe that theatre has an extremely important function in the development of structures in society, be they psychiatric, be they behavioral. And what happens to us artists is also important. We artists experience the lives of different people. We enact human predicaments. We see conflicts being resolved differently by different characters, and all that adds to our knowledge of human behavior. The same, almost the same, happens to the audience also. An audience comes prepared to be engaged and informed, entertained also, and also learn something. And he or she does learn something about, again, the human predicament, how different people behave in different situations. Maybe a solution is found, maybe an identification is made with a particular character or a situation. So there's so much that is happening. This is an almost unwritten contract between the performer and the audience. They come with the preparedness to believe in what we present to them. Now, in these 60 and more days of COVID and the impact of COVID, we believe mankind has gone through one of the most unnatural things of being locked up and having to move around only in their small houses, confronted with one another, and maybe realizing some good things and maybe even realizing some monsters that reside inside us or within the relationship. Now, with no theatre available, with no other interaction with people available, these things have really got aggravated. And so we felt that while theatre is not there to do what its task is in a very different way, is helping people recognize what is going on, we thought we will talk to an artist friend of ours, somebody who empathizes with the artist community, somebody who has engaged with society at large, understanding what is going on there in different people's minds and hearts. So I have with me Dr. Shekhar Seshadri, and he's going to touch upon 3 verticals which will really largely address the issues and try to help us recognize, articulate whether we need help. So the issues largely are children and parenting, uncertainty, the tyranny of uncertainty, and maybe special people with special needs, which means older people, senior citizens, disabled people, and people with special needs. How has the COVID impacted these 3 verticals in society? What can one look out for? How can we seek help if we need it? So I'm going to ask Dr. Shekhar Seshadri to join us now. Namaste. Welcome back to this 3rd segment of conversation with Dr. Shekhar Seshadri, who is an artist, and a theatre friend who is also Senior Professor, Department of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry at NIMHANS. And he's going to help us maybe find some threads that will help us unravel certain questions about our own minds, the situations we are in. So while the first section we spoke about children and parenting, in the second segment we spoke about the uncertainty of our lives today in this post-pandemic time. And of course, Dr. Seshadri and I have been floating around the space of Ranga Shankara and experiencing an empty auditorium and hoping that we will share this space with you. But we are trying to also show you that everything is fine and it's all waiting for you. The third segment is about special people with special needs. So Doc, I don't know much about this, but I'm sure you know and you have imagined what kind of issues could the special and disabled have. I can only imagine senior citizens who stay alone or senior citizens who are alone in spite of being within a family and could have only been pushed further into isolation. I cannot imagine what could have happened to the even more special people. Can you elaborate on this?
You will recall that last time we spoke about ecologies changing, and our reference at that time was to external ecologies.
Yeah.
But in response to what you're saying now, I wonder whether it's the ecology of our minds, inner ecologies. For people who are in the old age, realm, particularly those who unfortunately, let's say, have Alzheimer's, or for very young children, children with autism, children with special needs. This entire group of people needs stimulation because lack of stimulation only compounds their sensory issues and particularly for young children, their developmental trajectories. What happens, therefore, during a lockdown is that there is loss of special education opportunities. And as I pointed out in the first session that we had, when there is loss of play spaces and loss of playmates, and you get circumscribed to live within a lockdown situation, the lack of stimulation will affect children's abilities in the 5 domains of development: physical development, speech and language, social development, emotional development, and cognitive development. Now, this is worrying because in the larger anxieties that the pandemic has caused, the question of how are these special people experiencing all this? What is the experience of a 2-year-old of the pandemic and lockdown? What is the experience of a non-verbal child? What is the experience of a child who has hearing problem or visual problems to the pandemic? And it is imperative that we pay attention to the way that these populations and these people are experiencing the pandemic and the aftermath of, when we come out of it.
Okay. So what could we do? As I said, we are trying to repurpose our public spaces. What can a space like Ranga Shankara then do for this special population?
I would like to actually address this by introducing you to a very remarkable person called Rudolf Steiner. Rudolf Steiner was an Austrian psychoanalyst whose theory of anthroposophy, which is that branch of philosophy that deals with the optimization of human potential, came up with. Now, Steiner is known for the anthroposophic practice of medicine, for educational practices in the Waldorf system of schools for residential communities of adults with intellectual disability the world over, and these are known as Camp Hill communities. The remarkable thing about anthroposophy, and something that we can eminently practice in a space like this, is in its simplicity. Anthroposophy refers to a human being's potential to experience art and music and movement and nature. So even for a young child who was not able to go out and experience the world due to the pandemic, all it calls for is to have a pot with some sand or mud in it and throw a couple of mustard seeds or coriander seeds and allow the child to nurture that. And within 2 days, it germinates and you have a plant growing. Anthroposophy is as simple as that. Yeah. And therefore, to create a space, whether it is in a home or in an institution or in a public space like Ranga Shankara, to have spaces where we re-experience music and art and movement and nature, to have small beds of sand where children can just come and put a couple of mustard seeds and coriander seeds and come back a week later to see how they have grown, make patterns. In a way, it allows people with special needs to get stimulated and their sense and their sensibilities and all the domains of development to germinate just the way that the seeds germinate when you plant them. So these are some of the things that we need to consider going ahead of how we can utilize these spaces, given the proper physical distancing and safety measures and all that. So we create these little spaces and they become evocative spaces, as I said, to experience nature and all other human aesthetics and sensibilities in its entire complexity and its entire range.
Okay. Thanks so much, Doc. I think one more area that has intrigued me, we spoke about it while we were shifting from that seat to this place, and this was about Bangalore having a very high incidence of suicides. And I heard at some point of time that we were the capital, the suicide capital of the country. And we know that these are because of a very highly accelerated urban growth and isolation of a very young population. How do you see, obviously something like a COVID and its fallout is going to have a detrimental effect further on these populations of youngsters. How can we kind of help? How are we going to really bring these 3 talks that you have given and culminating in a workshop at Ranga Shankara? How do we reach out to these communities to reassure them that they are not alone? Do you have any ideas?
I want to share with you a very remarkable experiment that was done in Zimbabwe to basically address depression. Now, depression is a very common and a very prevalent human predicament. And there are not enough mental health professionals in India to be able to deal with the extent of depression. What was done in Zimbabwe is there were a set of grandmothers who were at a stage in their life cycle where their children had grown well and they had grandchildren. Some of them had even great-grandchildren. And they were lively. They wanted to do something. And they were trained essentially to be in public spaces. And they would sit in a park. And if anyone approached them, all they did was provide a patient and a listening ear with respect, attention, and empathy. And they found in a scientifically designed study that this actually alleviated the depression and it helped. So, depression and suicide needs to be understood in this context. There is a difference between a person who thinks in his or her mind that I'm in a difficult situation, as opposed to someone who says my situation is intolerable, as opposed to someone who says I do not wish to live, as opposed to someone who says I wish to die, as opposed to someone who says I wish to kill myself. They are not the same phenomenologically. And therefore, to catch a person in his or her personal narrative with the predicament or the problem context, to where that individual is positioned in terms of thinking processes. And all it needs for a human being to do is reduce the distance between someone who has a problem and someone who can offer assistance. Even that is a remarkable assistance that you can offer. So, for a place of safety, such as Ranga Shankara, so that people who may be hesitant because of issues of stigma or lack of knowledge to actually go to a professional facility to seek assistance, to know that there is a space like this, particularly in a time where there is loss of livelihood, there is unpredictability, there is uncertainty. And it's at times like this that despondency sets in. And hopelessness and despondency are very critically related to mediate the relationship between depression and suicidal intent. And therefore, to instill hope and reduce despondency is very important, because hopelessness has two components. My problem cannot be solved and there is no one to help me. But if you have the experience of someone actually giving you a patient, a respectful, an attentive and an empathic listening, you are convinced that there are people who are there to provide a listening ear. And that brings down the hopelessness and therefore, thereby the suicidal intent. And I believe that spaces like this can serve that function going ahead.
Thanks a bunch, Doc. So there's so much to be done, so much that can be done. And we are really looking forward to making a connect with our audiences. Doc will do a workshop, and that would be the first point of contact really for those who want to know more, who want to make contact with the empathetic, sympathetic ear. Thanks for being with us. Namaste.
Namaste.